Hi everyone, I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I'm going to be teaching some more stringing. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Gasparrini from Om Tara, and I'm so glad that you are here with me today. Today we're going to keep launching in on our Beading 101 class into stringing and crimping. And I wanted just to share with you, you'll see if you watched our class last Thursday or watched the replay, I'm wearing the necklace that I demoed for you. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the necklace. And then we're going to move on with creating a woven loop bracelet. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But I wanted to show you, for those of you who saw me make it, I did do a little bit of changing, so I'm going to show you what I did. If you remembered from the video, I had a mother of pearl bead right there, and I had created my woven loop. And I really had forgotten to put any of the other mother of pearl in it. So what I did is I also ran out of wire, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And so I did a little bit of changing. So this is what I talked about the very first class that we were when I talked about what you can do. Yes, you can take your piece apart. I finished it, and I had run out of the wire, as some of you saw, and so I did finish it. And then I looked at it, so I was able to really look at it, see it in its entirety, and just say, I really kind of bummed that I put the mother of pearl bead down there and didn't include any in the rest of the necklace. So I was able to kind of look at it, see what I liked about it, see what I didn't like about it. And so that's why I say finish your piece. Even if you don't like the piece you end up with, you will learn something. You will learn things about it that you like, and you'll learn the things about it that you don't like. And so that will inform you in what you do next. So yeah, keep going. It's okay to make mistakes, or it's okay to not like something. So I just wanted to bring it up there and show you. You can see that I kept my ABA pattern, but what I did is some of them I switched out that bone colored rondelle for some small mother of pearls, and then I had these graduated mother of pearls, so I started popping them in my ABA pattern. And there's another one where it got bigger, and there's another one where it got bigger. And then once I added the mother of pearl pieces in, I really wanted to bring that turquoise down all the way down. I really like having odd numbers, so initially I only had 4 turquoises. So I switched out that bottom mother of pearl for that turquoise bead, so that turquoise cathedral bead. So yeah, I just wanted to share with you this necklace and just show you how I changed it a little bit, and I'm happy with it. It's a little bit shorter, so it sits right below my quartz piece, and I'm happy with it. So I wanted to share with you how I changed it for those of you who watched me make it as I went. So there you go. I'll put it down. And what I want to talk to you about today is we are going to continue with stringing and crimping. And so I love stringing, and I know sometimes people think that stringing is a beginning technique, but really, and I've said this before, if you're putting beads on a wire and you're going to crimp them so they stay on, you're going to be doing that from probably the first day you start beading all the way into if you're still doing it 20 years from now. So I like to mix it up and let people see that there's lots of options for stringing that's not just putting beads on a wire and just kind of finishing it up very simply, which is good in and of itself. But I like to give you a little bit of tricks that you can put in your bag of tricks, I guess I'll say. So today we're going to start with a woven loop bracelet. So we're going to take that same idea of creating that loop that we did in the necklace here to create a pendant, and we're going to use this looping pattern to create a strung bracelet that has kind of structure and width and some substance to it rather than just single beads on a wire. And so I'll talk about that too. So the woven loop technique that I'm going to show you is based on a bead weaving technique, and that technique is called cross needle weave, and that's where you have 2 threads working and they work and cross. And so sometimes you'll have needle and thread, sometimes people use it with kind of a thinner fishing line that has some structure so you can manipulate it without it being too wimpy. So that's called a cross needle weave, and a lot of Japanese bead weaving projects are made with this cross needle weave technique. I'm going to switch around and I'm going to talk to you about our project.
So I'm going to just pop in the materials that you can see. I might have to pull you up just so you can see that a little bit better, and then I'll adjust you down so you have a better view of my fingers. So we're going to create a woven loop bracelet. I'm just going to leave this here for you, just so if you want to, if you'll have it, if you want to gather your beads when you watch the replay. So we are going to have stringing wire, and remember I talked about finished length plus 5 to 7 inches. And if you're just joining me, the finished length means the length you want your piece to be when it's finished. So I use, for an example, a 7-inch finished length of a bracelet. Now we add that 5 to 7 inches in so that we can do our looping and creating, adding clasps. We can do our crimping. And those of you who watched last Thursday, you can see in that video that I did not allow enough for finishing the necklace. And what I wrote in the comments last week is that if you are going to create a woven loop necklace, let me just bring it back here, then you are going to want to add, instead of 5 to 7, you're going to want to add about 10. So we're going to add about 5 to 7 inches, and then we are going to multiply it by 2 or double it. Because we're going to be working with 2 cords on either side, we're going to be using a doubled length. So multiply by 2. And so here I have an example. So if I want a 7-inch bracelet, I'm going to add that 5 inches in. So just make it easier for myself. So that's 12. 12 times 2 is 24. That's 2 feet. And so I'm going to cut a 2-foot piece and probably just a little bit more to make it easier on myself. When you do the weaving, you do use up a little bit more wire. And also one of the, this happens with macrame as well. The smaller the bead, the more material you need. So the smaller the bead that you work with, the more wire you'll need. So I would even say you may want to cut about 3 feet and just make sure that you have enough wire to work with. So we're going to be working with 2 crimps. I have a 2-part clasp. This time I'm going to be using a toggle clasp. And then 2 or more, but I'm working with 2 types of beads. A focal bead and some other beads. So I'll show you what that means when I get them out. And the other thing about it is that the focal bead needs to fit 2 wires inside of it. So I'm just going to bring my necklace back around. This is from last week. And remember we had the wire coming down through this bead. I call it the pass-through bead. We had the wire looping around, and then that wire passed back through that bead again. So this bead, whatever bead I chose here for my focal bead, had to be able to fit both this wire on this side and this wire through it. So whatever bead you're choosing for your focal bead has to be able to accommodate or fit 2 wires. So in our bracelet, we're going to have a very similar pattern where we're going to have these focal beads, these loops, and then these focal beads running down the center, and you'll see it as I make it. But whatever bead I choose for my focal bead, it has to be able to fit 2 wires through it. So I hope that makes sense. And so we've got our 2 types of wires. Now I'm saying 2 beads. It could be, I'm going to show you, I'm going to demo, I'm going to bring my necklace back in. I'm going to bring, use white rice pearls and then some strawberry quartz. So I'm going to have it very simple. I'm not going to end up patterning my bracelet the way that I patterned the loop of my necklace. But you can add in more beads than just two different ones. You just need to make sure that one focal bead will accommodate 2 wires. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm going to be using some white rice pearls and some strawberry quartz rounds. They're 4 millimeters, and I tested, I can fit 2 wires through those beads. And then again, I'm going to be using some size 11 seed beads, just as they'll help define the beads, and also they'll hide some of the wire when we create those loops. We sometimes have some wire exposed, so the seed beads allow you to kind of hide the wire and add a little decorative element. So that's it. So again, I'll go back. We're going to start with some stringing wire. I'm going to cut about a little bit more than 2 feet, between 2 and 3 feet, to be able to make a 7-inch bracelet. I've got my 2 crimps. I've got my clasp. My clasp has a 2-part clasp, and I'll show you that in a sec. And then I've got my 2 types of beads. One is a focal that can fit 2 wires, and then we've got our coordinating seed beads that I'm going to be using too. So I'm going to show you what that is. So here we go. I've got my wire, and I'm just going to unravel it, and I'm going to show you the beads that I'm working with. I'm just going to put my wire down here on the table. And I've got my strawberry quartzes. I'm going to probably pick out some of those a little bit brighter colors. Some of them are kind of pale, some of them are brighter. And I've got my rice pearls. If I need more than that, I'll grab them. And I've got my clasp. And I'm using a toggle bar clasp here. And I've got some crimps. And I'm going to be using some seed beads, so I'm going to dump those out too. And pour them out kind of over here. Okay, let me bring those down a little closer into our view. All right, so we're going to start with our piece, and I'm going to show you. I've got my about almost 3 feet piece, and I have it kind of folded into a U. What I like to do is I take the two ends, and I'm going to flush them up just like that to make it even, and I can just fix that after. And you can see I've got a loop. Now, the very first Beading 101 class that we did when I demoed the sun catcher, we created a beaded loop, and I'm going to just review that because that's what I'm going to do for this bracelet. I'm going to choose probably in total maybe 8 seed beads, but I'm going to add my clasp on it too. So I'm going to add 4. Now I can use both ends or just thread the beads on from one end. I'm just going to use one side as my needle side. And then I'm going to thread my clasp through. I don't think this clasp will jump over the seed beads, so what I'm doing is I'm putting on half the seed beads and then my clasp, and then I'm going to put the other 4 seed beads. I love the color of these seed beads, but they are a little bit quirky in shape. So some of them are really tall and some of them are short, so I'm just trying to find some that are about the same size. So there's my 8 seed beads. I'm going to flush up the ends of my wire here. And I'm going to let all that drop down into the loop of the U. And I can see if I want to bring this down, if I really want to make that bigger, or look at my piece. I think that's a big enough loop for me right now. So I'm working with 0.012 beading wire. I tend to like to use 0.012 or 0.015, which is a bit thinner. Last time I used 0.019, which has a little bit more heft to it. But since I like to do bead weaving techniques with stringing wire, I tend to like to work with thinner wire. And this is bulk wire that I buy, and it's 7 strands. So it's flexible enough, and it's not doesn't have a lot of drape like I talked about last week. I talked about drape. I'm just going to thread the crimp on in while I talk and show you. So I like it to have a little bit of stiffness, and I also like when I'm doing my weaving for it to have to be thinner so that I can actually manipulate the wires, and I can weave 2 wires into a single bead. So you saw that I put my crimp on both wires, and usually what I do is when we're stringing is we put the crimp on one wire and then we finish the other side. But for this project, we're doubling the wire over and threading the crimp on both wires. And then I'm going to slide that crimp all the way down to the end. You can see here that I'm using my crimp to help me create that beaded loop. And so when we did our sun catcher project, remember we had those 2 seed beads were kind of getting close together at the crimp, so we want to be careful when we crimp it. Now, in reality, I don't really have to crimp this because once I start putting beads on each wire, this crimp will never come off. But because I am going to crimp the end, I am going to close it, crimp it closed. So I'm going to grab my crimper. So this is my Om Tara crimper. There's my dip in my tooth. I'm going to put the crimp in the dip, and I'm going to make sure that I have no seed beads peeking in the back. I don't want any of those seed beads getting into the jaws like that one just tried to jump in. And then I'm just going to pull. I'm pulling on my wire. My crimp is right in the dip, and then I'm going to use my squeeze and let that tooth do the securing. I'm not going to, I could fold it if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it because it's just going to look, it's a little, I think that's fine. I think it'll be fine. And then I'm going to start my pattern. So now with this bracelet pattern, we have two wires that we're going to be working with. And these I will call working wires. So each wire is going to get its own bead, its own set of beads. So they are going to be symmetrical because we are going to be creating loop patterns. And so we want the sides to be the same. So I'm going to create a pattern on this wire, and then I'm going to repeat that pattern on this wire. And because, I'm going to just show you real quick, because the wires are coming out of that crimp together, and they're very tight in there, rather than start with a larger bead like this on both of my wires, I'm going to start with a seed bead so that it can help the wires kind of spread apart and be ready for when I'm going to add my larger bead to that. So I'm going to grab a seed bead and a seed bead. Put some more seed beads down here. I'm going to put one and one. Now I'm somewhat ambidextrous, so I'm comfortable using both sides of both hands equally. You don't have to do it and hold it like I just did. You could do one side and then do the other side. So there's my two beads, seed beads on my work-in wires, right? Each wire is getting its own stuff. So now my pattern, I think, is going to be a pearl, a seed bead, and a pearl. And for this pattern, I am going to put my wire down. I'm going to let that slide down. And then and actually I want to do a seed bead on the end. So let me show you what I just did. I dropped it a little fast. So my pattern is going to be a seed bead, a pearl, a seed bead, a pearl, a seed bead. So a seed bead, pearl, seed bead, pearl, seed bead. I'm beginning and ending with a seed bead. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I've got seed bead. Oh no, I already put one on. I've got my pearl, my seed bead, and my pearl. I could do, oh gosh, I better bring that up closer to my eyes, and my seed bead. So I'm using 5 beads. Now I could trade out any of these beads for some other bead, but this is going to be my pattern. I like vintagey colors. I love the color of this seed bead. It's kind of a browny pink, and I just love it. So then I've got my working wires, they've got their pattern, and so what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to use a pass-through. So I'm going to pick maybe one of the lighter, kind of the lighter of the dark colors, and I'm going to take this is my pass-through bead. So I'm going to take my one wire, doesn't matter which one I start with, and I'm going to go through the bead. I'm just going to add it onto that wire. Now what I'm going to do with my second wire is, since this is my focal and my pass-through bead, I'm going to take the second wire and I'm going to go in the side that this wire is coming out of. So I'm going to go in and come out the opposite side. And before I tighten up, you can see that my wires are coming out opposite ends. And if I could x-ray my bead right there, I would see that there's a little X of wire inside. So I call this a cross pass-through because the wires are going in opposite sides and they're crossing each other and coming out opposite sides. I'm going to pull, and you'll see that this will create, as we move on, a round shape. And I want to talk about why it doesn't look exactly round right now. So you can see that when we put our crimp on, the wires went through the crimp together, or in a parallel. I call that a parallel pass through. So that crimp is the wires were coming through in a parallel. So they came out parallel and then they split, and now they're coming through in a cross pass through. So one of the things I want to say when we talk about pass-throughs is when you alternate parallel and cross pass-throughs, you create these teardrop shapes. And what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to keep creating round shapes. I could mix it up if I wanted to, and I'll show you what that would look like if I did. So I'm going to keep going. So there's my first pass through. My focal bead can fit both of these wires. And that's another reason why I like to work with thinner wire, because I like to work with the beads that I want to work with, and if I'm working with a thicker wire, it does limit my choice for this center bead. So that's why I work with 0.012 or 0.015. And so here I go. I'm going to do my other pattern with my pearls. I'm going to do a bead, a pearl, seed bead, a pearl, seed bead, pearl, and a seed bead. That's my pattern. And I'm going to let that sit, and I'm going to go on the other wire. So I have to do my seed bead, pearl. Hopefully I'm not getting off camera. Sometimes I drift. And there's a seed bead pearl, and then my last seed bead. And so we've got my pattern, working wires. They got their job. They just did their job. They got their beads on. Just check it and make sure I'm all on track with my pattern. Then the next thing we do is cross pass through. So I'm going to take a pass through. Now I want to just show you, I think I'm going to keep kind of a lighter of the dark. So the bead goes on one wire. There's the end coming out. I take the other wire and I pop it through the opposite side. So the tails are coming out opposite of each other. And then I pull them equally, and you can see I've got this really nice loop shape. So what I've got here is I have a parallel pass through where both the wires came through the crimp this way. Now the working wires split and they went through in opposite directions. And so a parallel and a cross make a teardrop shape, and a parallel create a loop shape. So you can really play with the shape of your piece just by deciding how you want the wire to go through this pass-through bead. So I'm going to show you a teardrop shape next, and then I'll probably take it off because I want to keep the looping pattern for my piece. So you can create these really dynamic structures and patternings just by the way that your wires go through the bead, the focal bead. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to grab some more of my seed bead, pearl, seed bead, pearl. Now your side patterns or the pattern of your loop could be so much more complex than mine, but for what we were doing for the show, for doing this for the live, I just wanted to have something that was simple that I could show and not be complicated. So I've got my seed bead, pearl, seed bead, pearl, and my last seed bead. And here I go. So working wires did their job. They've got their little beads on there. I've got all my seed beads in the right spot. And I'm going to show you what happens if I decide to use my wire in a parallel pass through. So what I've been doing with the cross is I put the bead on one wire and then I go through the bead with this opposite in an opposite direction. So if I want to do a parallel pass through, all I do is flush up the ends and pop them both through the bead in the same direction. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So there's a parallel pass through, both ends are going through. I'm going to come down and you can see that it's going to create more of a teardrop shape. So I've got my teardrop, my round, and my teardrop shape. Let me just get my fingers out of there and tighten it up so you can see. So you can see it creates sort of this undulating teardrop, round, teardrop shape. This could be a really nice center of a bracelet if I had something really special beads here. I could make this be the center of my bracelet, this patterning. And it might take a little bit of practice just to get the size right for you to be able to do that. But just so you can see how just the direction that you change the wire path changes the shape of the bead. Now, if you wanted to, you could do parallel pass-throughs all the way, and you're going to end up with much more straight pattern than this kind of undulating, this circular pattern. So I'm just going to take one. Now, oh, I want to say this too. Sometimes when I've taught this in my college class, people would, before they really got the gist of the patterning or the pass through, they would get here and they wouldn't know, like, what did I do wrong? I can't figure it out. I know it doesn't look right, but I can't figure out what I did wrong. So if you get to a parallel pass through and you notice, oops, both of the wires are coming out the same side, just pull one of them out. You don't have to take both wires off because you might even get lost if you do that. And then I've got one out. I see that the wire's coming out this side, and I take this wire and pop it in the side that the other wire's coming out. So now my wires are coming out opposite ends. And now I'm back to my circle. Now mine might be sitting a little wonky. The seed beads are not all uniform, but somewhat circular. And I'm going to keep going. So my working wires get their pattern. I love these colors. They're very vintagey. I like, I was looking for, I had some pink coral in the house that I thought I was going to use, but when I put it up against the white, it just didn't have quite the look I wanted with these kind of vintagey colored seed beads. Oops, yep, I did. I was thinking I forgot my middle seed bead. And so when I found these strawberry quartz, I was like, oh, that's the perfect tone. And here I go. So I'm going to go seed bead, pearl. And I can see, you know, that some of the pearls that I have are a little bit different. So I think I might actually just pay attention to the size of some of my pearls because some of them are a little bit smaller than the others. And I'm going to do a seed bead and a pearl. And that means I might have to get some more off my strand because I think I might have quite a few of those little guys in there. So I've got my working wires. Here I go. Check and make sure my pattern's right. And I'm going to cross pass through. So now I think I might want to get a little bit of a darker. I'm going to try to do an ombre and see like an ombre color, so lighter getting darker of the center. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, if I'll map it out correctly, since I'm not sure how many circles are going to create the length. But this is my trial, and then again, like I did with my necklace, I could decide to fix it if it doesn't come out the way I want. So wire goes in opposite sides, and I'm pulling. So you can already see that the thread path or the wire path is already circular. Once my ends are coming out opposite side of the bead, I've already created this looping pattern. So that's how you know you're on track. If your wire's looking circular, your beads are going to look circular. There we go. So I've got it keeping going. I'm just going to test my wrist, if I even have space on my wrist. Excuse me, let me get my arm out of the way. And I just like to build it around myself. So I can see that I'm getting pretty close to the top of my wrist. Now, if I were measuring, I could measure it and say, okay, I want a 7-inch bracelet. It's probably 3.5. I could do that, but I like to work off my body. So I have four sections, and I am going to end up with this loop and crimp on the other side and my clasp. So I think I'm probably going to be ending up with an 8 patterned, an 8 loop bracelet. And now if I wanted to, since I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, that's what I'm guessing. This center right here is this is going to be my center. So I might want to do, if I had like a special bead, I could pop it in the center section, the one that's separating. But for now, I'm just going to keep going with what I have. But I do know that if this is going to be my center section, I may want to start going a little bit lighter now as I move back as I build the other side of the bracelet. And since this is all an experiment, I'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, I can always take it apart. I like to let myself kind of play like I'm doing and think I know what I'm doing and see how it works. And then if it doesn't work, I can make it again. That's okay. I've found that if I try to plan it out, sometimes it doesn't always come out the way I thought it was going to come out anyway, so I just let myself go, see what happens. Make sure I put my seed bead, my pearl, and my last seed bead. I'm going to put down this wire and put up my other wire, seed bead pearl, seed bead pearl, and seed bead, and I'm going to keep it going. And there we go. And I'm going to do my cross pass through. So I'm going to go for a little bit lighter in the tone, maybe that one, and I'll pull some out. I think that's good. Maybe go, yeah, maybe this one. I can see the hole on that one better. And then so bead goes on the wire, the opposite wire goes in the door that the other wire is coming out. So this is how I know that I've got my pass through right, is that I've got the tails coming out opposite sides of the bead. And then the other check is that as I pull, if I see the wire path looks circular, I know, again, that's my check. I know I'm doing it in a circular pattern. Now, if you pull too tight, just something to notice when you're creating this bracelet, if you're working with very small beads and you're starting to pull tight and you have a little bit stiffer wire, you might end up kind of having the bracelet buckle, kind of like this. Once you wear it, it'll settle down, but just notice you may have to find a balance of really pulling everything tight if it starts buckling. I just love seed beads, and that was pretty much, you know, where I started with my jewelry making business, was working with seed beads, and I love them so much. They're so beautiful. I have a huge collection of them and I just love them. So I really like to incorporate them into my stringing work for a lot of different reasons. The colors are beautiful and they add a little pop of color. They also are great little spacers like I showed you last week. So there's my one. And this is, I mean, I could have just used the pearls and the strawberry quartz, but finding this, I'm going to pull this strand over it if I can see if it doesn't fall off. Yeah. Here's the color tone. So it's like got these iris tones in it, but it is, I think the name of it is actually brown iris. I think that's what it is. It looks more pink, but I'll have to remember, but I think it's more of a brown, but it has this just gorgeous tone. I love it. And let me get this side. So we've got pink, you know, seed bead, a pearl, a seed bead, a pearl. And you'll see, even with, well, last week, you know, I talked about the ABA patterning. I, I, I tend to bead with this sort of rhythmic patterning. So here I've got seed bead, pearl, and then I'm going to stop, and there's my seed bead, and then do something different. So I create this sort of rhythmic patterning. It's just the way that I like to do it, or it works for me. And then I'm going to go a little bit lighter in one side, in the other side, coming out the other side. So that's my check. Yes, they're coming out opposite sides, and then I pull, and yes, that does look circular. I'm going to keep going. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Get that guy out of the way, and I'm going to keep going. And I do have an idea of what I'm going to teach for our tip day on Tuesday, but if you have a specific question that you're wondering about, pop it in there, and I'll see if it's not this Tuesday, I'll definitely make a tip day around it, our Tuesday tip day, because that's how I've been getting the topics for Tuesdays, is because of the questions that you're asking. So please ask if there's something that you're wondering about. And if you didn't tune in on Tuesday, we talked about the color wheel. So that was really fun, and that's because Pam asked me, and that ended up becoming this really interesting lesson. I was glad to refresh my memory about it and to be able to share with you information about that. So here I go. I've got my working wires, did their job. Let me just check. You guys be my checks and make sure I've got my seed beads on there. Did I? Oh yeah, I did. There he is. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I just want to say I'll go a little bit lighter. Maybe one of these. So in one side, and the other wire goes in the opposite side. Goes in the side the wire is coming out. There I have my little antennas, it looks like. And I check my pass through. There's my circular path. So I'm going to stop right here and just talk about what's going to happen next. So we came out of a crimp parallel, we put our working wire pattern on, we passed through, we did our patterning, passed through, I'm keeping going, and so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So my last segment, I can test it on my wrist again, let's just check. Oh, well, it looks like I might need more. I'm just going to bring that in. I'm not quite around, I'm going to keep going. So this is where I had this idea of what was going to happen with my ombre pattern of my center, and it's not exactly panning out, so this is where I might, if I wanted to, I could take it apart or I could finish it or whatever, but I'm just going to keep going. So it looks like I'm going to have to maybe end up with like a 9 or a 10 pattern. So yeah, these are about a 6 to 7 millimeter length. I could measure them, and these are about a 4. These might be about 6, these pearls. Some of them might be a little bit bigger. And they're rice pearls. So I'm going to keep going. And actually, since I just realized that I'm going to be making, see how light that one is? I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to take that one out and just change it up right now, since I realize I'm going to have to probably go a little bit longer. And I'm going to go with a little bit darker of a bead. In, and then this wire goes in the opposite side. And pull. I'm going to keep going. I've got my pattern to do, and I think I'm going to grab some more pearls. Let me grab those. And just so you can, we were talking about stringing wire. The thicker the stringing wire, the stiffer the stringing wire that you're going to be using, it can tend to make your loops buckle. So that's one other reason why I like to work with a thinner stringing wire, so that it gives me a little bit more room to weave like I'm doing. So again, this is a cross needle weave pattern. And my sister, Amy, used to live in Japan, and she had all these really interesting Japanese bead weaving books, and a lot of them used cross needle weave, and they were the most intricate designs, just using two wires like this, and weaving in and out and in and out. It was just, they were beautiful. And then I had a Japanese student who came to my college class who shared with me her books. They were just so beautiful. And it was mostly this very simple technique of using two working wires, weaving in and out in pretty complex patterns. So it was really neat. So there's my working wires. I'm going to make my cross pass through. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter. And a little bit. This is the kind of thing that there's my test, got my little antennas coming out opposite side, pull, got my loop. There I go. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Probably I'm going to end up with 9 or 10, so I'm just going to do my other working wires. So we've got seed bead, pearl seed bead. And actually, when I get into this sort of rhythmic thing and I tell myself seed bead, pearl seed bead, it's comforting, and it also is meditative, and it also helps me remember not to, so that I don't forget one component, especially probably that seed bead is one that I would forget. So I usually do kind of get it in my head, okay, we're doing seed bead, pearl, seed bead, and it helps me stay on track. And I'm going to go there, and I'm going to try one more parallel pass through, and then I'm going to see how it's fitting. Now you can see it's using up quite a lot of wire here, so I'm glad I gave myself a little bit extra. I'm going to grab another a bit lighter one and in on one wire, and then second wire passes through. And for those of you who are just tuning in, I will put the materials list up at the end just so you can have it, just so you can see. And then when I put it up on YouTube, I've started to put the ingredients list or the materials list in the beginning of the video. So it's a little, I edit it a little bit. So here's our piece, and I'm just going to hold these two together, and I'm going to fit it and see how I'm doing around my wrist. Oh, now I'm feeling good about this. If you can see, I'm feeling like if I do one more, I'm going to be right at the right spot. Now, if you like yours a little looser, you'll have to just test and see. Now, and also depending on the size of the beads you're using, you may end up with fewer or more sections than I have. So it really is specific to the beads that you're going to choose for this pattern. So here I go. I'm going to do my working wires, and here I go. So seed bead. Oops, I really need close-up glasses. Let's just go for that one. Seed bead, pearl, seed bead. I just happen to have almost exactly the amount of pearls. I think I have one left. Go in that hole. Check my pattern. Seed bead, pearl, seed bead. Yep. And then I'm going to go seed bead on this end, pearl, seed bead. These seed beads have a little quirkiness. Some of them are little funny shapes. So I'm trying to pick the ones that look pretty good. Seed bead, pearl, seed bead. And I'll bring that up so you guys can check my pattern. Got seed bead, pearl, seed bead, pearl, seed bead. There we go. Okay, so what happened is that when I started, I came through the crimps, and when I'm ending, I'm going to go through the crimps. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to put the wires together so that they're parallel, they're flush up. They should be still about even, which they are, and I'm going to grab another crimp. So when I'm finishing, I'm going to go both wires parallel pass through my crimp and bring it down. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated, and this will all get tightened up in the end, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Oh, and it just popped in my mind. Right angle weave, thank you, brain. So this is a right angle weave patterning, and right angle weave creates the same design, but with one needle. So what it does is it weaves through and then it weaves around like this. So that's the right angle weave pattern, but it ends up creating the same one. So cross needle weave uses two to interact this way, and right angle weave loops around like this and keeps looping around like that. But you end up with a very similar look. Yeah, you can do a lot of different things to adjust your length, and so I would try to keep your patterning the same. You could what we could do here, and I'll show you because I'm going to be putting on this toggle, and toggles need a little bit of space to be able to fit through the ring. I'll share that with you. I could make the loop. I did my beaded loop on this side. I could, and I may, we'll see how it goes. I may do my beaded loop on this side a little bit bigger just to give that toggle some space. So you could adjust the length if you needed just a little bit more in that loop. It won't be as visible as if you change the pattern here. You could adjust that loop. I think that would be probably the best place. So let's see. I might end up having to do that given the length of mine and that toggle bar. So okay, so this is where things get a little bit complicated. So far we've had our working wires, our pass-through, our working wires, our pass-through. We've got our last working wires. We have a parallel pass-through where the wire's going through the crimp. And then what we're going to do is once the wires go through that crimp, they are pretty much acting like they're glued together. Okay, they are essentially one wire. So I am going to try to find some seed beads that have pretty big holes because both of my wires have to go through that seed bead. So that one worked. And I started with 8, and I think I might put on 10. So I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to extend the size of this loop a little bit. Now you don't have to, but I think I might just, I'm thinking ahead. So because I'm going to put my toggle bar on, I'm going to put this halfway. So if I'm doing 10, I'm going to do 1, And I'm actually kind of hunting for seed beads that have a little bit bigger hole. So I've got 3. If you can see, hopefully my finger's not in the way too much. 4. But you can see both the wires are going through that seed bead. And let me pull some more out over here. 5. They all have a pretty good size hole. And if your wires end up uneven, I'm going to put my finger there so you can see, you can always trim them up so that they're even. If one of your wires ended up a little bit longer or shorter than the other, you can always trim them up flush. So there's my toggle bar I'm popping on there. And then I'm going to do 5 more. That one is weird. I'm going to keep getting that one out of the way. I keep wanting to grab it, but it has a little odd size. So both wires are in. Just check, because sometimes I put one in and I think, and then I've actually skipped the other one. There's 2. I'm going to pick these up just because it's easier to. And I may do, oh, there's another one. 3. And 4. That one looks pretty good. And some of these look kind of small, so I think I'm going to just grab one more from over here, and that one looks excellent. 5. And so now what I've got is I've got my 5 and my 5. Now if I'm just going to go for this, and if I needed to, if it got too long, I could do some adjusting and take one of the seed beads off, but for now I'm just going to just use it as is. And really what I want to do is I want to make sure that, I'm going to show you this up high. See that the length of that bar, the half a length of the bar, I want these seed beads to be a little bit at least equal or a little bit longer. Let me get that guy out of here. I will show you what I'm talking about. I hope this is going to make sense. That little bar here of the T, I want my seed beads to be a little bit longer than that bar, just because when we go up through the loop, I want to show you something, but just keep that in mind. I want the seed bead, half the seed beads, to be longer than that bar. So that means the other ones on the other side are longer than that side, and I'll show you why. So now if I were going to redo this, I would probably on this side, instead of adding 8 seed beads, I would probably add 10 so they're equal. But we're making this up as we go. So I've got my 2 wires, they're acting like they're one wire, and they came out of the crimp. Now they're both going to go back through the crimp together. And people ask me all the time, are you sure it will fit? And I'm like, yes, most 2mm crimps can fit quite a lot of wires. See how they're all in there? And so we came out of the crimp, then they were together. They went through the seed beads together, they went through the crimp together, the clasp, they went through the seed beads together. They're coming back around and they're going through the crimp together. Once they go through this crimp, and I'm going to open everything up just so you can see. This is where it gets complicated. We split the wires. Remember when we talked about finishing, where we want our crimp, when we go through the crimp, we want our wire to go through a bead after the crimp? Well, that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to slide my wire through that little seed bead. If it could go through the pearl, I would slide it through there. I'm going to see if it will go. I don't, oh, am I lucky? Yeah, awesome. So see how I'm going back through those 2 beads. Get these guys out. I'm going to take this same wire here. I'm jumping through the seed bead, jumping through the pearl. I was lucky with the pearl. Sometimes those pearls are not. And now I am going to try to shut all of this down. I'm going to let me see what I'm doing here so I don't undo what I just did. And I'm just going to start pulling. And this is how we shut down this bracelet. So we pull on the tails, pull on the beads. So I wanted to pull on the tails first so I could get the beads back down. Pull on the crimp. This is something I said both Thursdays. This is what you do. You pull on the beads, you pull on the crimp, you pull on the tail. And since we have 2 tails, we have to pull on 2 tails. And I like to keep the 2 tails kind of even. So I want this loop to shut down pretty evenly, so I don't want to get one really tight and one really loose. These are going to scooch up. The beads are going to scooch up, so I'm going to pull on the beads, pull on the crimp, pull on the tail. And you have to be really patient with this because this is just working out the slack. And most of the slack is up here in the loop and some of it's down here. So I'm going to pull on the beads, pull on the crimp, pull on the slack. And before I crimp it, I'm just going to do a little testing. And this is what I want to show you, why I want those beads to be longer than my T-bar. Maybe I was a little bit, I put on more than I needed, but I want to show you why. So when you have a T-bar, the way that it goes through a ring, the toggle, the ring of the toggle, is that the whole bar has to go up through and then it flips and sits down. So if you don't give the T enough space, let me get it out of there again, to turn like this, flat. Say I had a big bead right here and my T-bar could not turn this way, I won't be able to get it through the toggle. So whenever you're using T-bars, just make sure you give your T enough space to kind of flatten down and pop up and out. So when I use T-bars, I rarely put a very big bead after it. Here we go. So I'm just going to tuck, and keep testing. I'm just checking to make sure my weave looks good and I didn't get any gaps anywhere. Again, I'm going to pull on the crimp, pull on the wires, and I'm good. Now this is one of those spots where getting the crimper in there is kind of tough. So we're going to just make sure we give it enough room to get in there without squishing any seed beads. So I'm going to put the crimp in the dip. I'm going to, that seed bead is definitely trying to get in there. Just going to try to get him out, and I want to make sure the back ones are not in. Once my crimp is in there and I can pull the seed beads out, that one is really tempting. It's really tempting fate. And I'm just going to make sure he's out. And then I'm going to pull and pull. Oops, that guy jumped in there. So take the time that you need to really make sure that the seed beads are not in there. And then I'm gently going to squish because I don't want anybody in there. If I squish really quickly and a seed bead snuck in there, I will crack it. But if I can maybe catch it before I squish it, if I go slow. And then I'm just going to squeeze. So there's my piece. And once I jiggle everything, I should be able to kind of get any gap back, like cover it back up. So now I'm going to trim and get my cutter right in there and nip. And hopefully I can get that little tail hidden. And then again on this side too. Cut her in. Oops. Be careful not to cut your piece. And nip. So there is my cross needle, or my woven loop. This is a cross needle bracelet. I call it a woven loop bracelet. And you can see probably I was one off with my darker strawberry quartz. So if I were really cared about it, I would redo it and maybe move it, or not even care. So it's up to me. And so I'm going to pop it on, and it's pretty good fit. And pull my toggle through. Okay, so you can take this very basic pattern, and I would say if you haven't made this before, just make a simple one. Get your wrist size, get the pattern down, and then you can start modifying. So what I would do is I would say, okay, if I'm using these pearls, I know I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sections. Then I can start mapping it out and starting to really design the center. I could change the bead running down the center. I could mix it up. I could change the size. But once I start my first one, I really like to do a test project. And then see what happens. Like I can see that you know, I misplaced this one. I could have put it somewhere else. So now I know. And the next one I'll do differently. Cross needle weave or a woven loop bracelet. So let me leave that down, and I'm just going to show you the ingredient list again. Oh, and I'm going to save these because what I have planned on Tuesday is to show you what I can do with all these leftover bits. Because how many of us throw these in the trash, right? but I have some ideas for what you can do with those. So that's what I'll show you on Tuesday, unless anybody has a burning question. So let me pop that back down and see if you can see that again. So let me take my tools out so it lays flat. Woven loop bracelet, your stringing wire. Now I cut, I had my finished length, which is about 7.5, maybe 7. I added my 5 inches about, and then I multiplied by 2. So here's my example. My finished was 7 inches. What I wanted it to be finished at was 7. I added 5, so that's becomes 12. 12 times 2 is 24 inches, or 2 feet. And I added a little bit more. So I was probably getting closer to about 28 inches or 30 inches. I just gave myself extra. I really like to work with more than I need. So I cut myself 2+ feet, which is about 28 inches. And just remember, if you're working with beads that are smaller than mine, you are going to want to give yourself more wire. So the smaller the bead, the more weaving you're going to do. The more weaving, the more wire it's going to take. I used 2 crimps. I have a 2-part clasp, and I used a toggle. So the last time I used a hook and eye, so this is a toggle clasp, which I just love these clasps. And then I used 2 types of beads, bigger beads. I used my strawberry quartz as my focal. I knew that my focal bead could fit 2 wires, and I tested it to be sure, so I had to make sure of that. And then I used a second type of bead. I used my rice pearls. I used my 4mm strawberry quartz rounds, and then I used size 11 seed beads. That's what I used. You could modify the size of any of these beads. They don't have to be my exact sizes, but it gave me, using this size of a pearl and that size of a round, and size 11 seed beads, it allowed me to make a bracelet this size. So, oh, my sister said, Om Tara crimper, yeah. So yes, and I used the Om Tara crimper, which I did not put on the list. So yeah, I used my Om Tara crimper. My sister's always looking out for me. Thank you. So I'm going to turn you around, and these are called the Om Tara crimper, and I invented them. Excuse me, I have 2 patents on them, and they work with 1 squeeze. I'm super proud of them. They work really, really well. So check out my website, and I'll tell you about that in just a sec. If there's any questions that you have, please don't hesitate to ask, because your questions are the way that I get to design our tip day. So they're great. Otherwise, I come up with an idea. I have lots of ideas, but I love being able to answer your questions, because that's why I'm here. So you inspire me by asking the questions that you want to know. It inspires me. If I like with the color, I just went back into my files of color and re-educated myself. So it's really inspiring for me. So don't be worried about asking questions. It really is helpful. And if you have a question, it's more than likely that somebody out there in our community has that same question and hasn't asked it yet. So yeah, feel free. And I also wanted to say, if you like today's class, please click like on my Facebook page, my Om Tara page. You should probably be watching it on my page right now. So if you haven't liked my page, please do. We're just shy of 10,000 people who are fans of Om Tara. So I'm so excited. So if you haven't clicked like, please do. And then also, take some time to visit omtara.com. That's my website, and I've got lots of beady goodies there, and the Om Tara crimpers are there. And then also join my tribe. That's where I send out my newsletter. I send it out kind of every month. That's my target, but sometimes it takes a little longer. And then there's also coupons and things like that, so I'd let you know where I'm going to be in trade shows and on JTV and other announcements. So please join my tribe. I'd love it. So I'm wishing you guys all a wonderful weekend. Have a great weekend. Tune in on Tuesday if you want to for Tip Day. That's at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then next Thursday, I've got another stringing project that I'm going to show you. And that is again at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So I'm wishing you all happy weekend, happy beading, make something pretty, and please share it on my Om Tara Facebook page. Show us, because you inspire other people. It's really good to keep that creative flow happening. So I'm sending love, and I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 or on the replay, but I'll wave at you anyway. Okay, take care. Happy beading. Bye.